Hey guys, so yesterday we talked about Noel and what kind of things you want to put on Noel, what are good artifacts look like, we use this calculator. Um, Today I'm just going to talk about how damage scaling works in general. Okay, so just to kind of get right into it here, we got the character's base attack. Okay, now that's this part here of our calculator that we have, and this is basically the character inherently to them has some amount of base attack. Okay, so in Noah's case, that's like 170 or whatever. In Fischl's case, maybe that's like 400, right? Depending on your level of your character and whatnot. And then you're going to have a weapon, your weapon's going to have a level, and your weapon's going to have a base attack. Now, let's say, someone asked me the other day, why does it matter how good the bow my Fischl has is if I only use her E, right? Now, obviously, some of you already know the answer to this, but basically it's because when you equip your bow, you're getting this base attack stat, which applies to all of your damage that scales on your attack. So it doesn't matter whether or not you're actually using the bow in this game, because the only thing you're equipping the bow for is this stat, all right? The numbers mean everything. So once we add these numbers together and we get our total base attack of like 620 in this case almost, this is the number that all your attack percent scales on, okay? So the reason attack percent is worse than, significantly worse than most other forms of percent increases is because it only scales off of this number, all right? Now, then you can go in, you can be like, okay, well, my character, Fischl, has a character bonus of like 100% attack, right? Venti has like 100% energy recharge. You can see this like fourth stat they have. Whenever you go to ascend them, it'll show you every character has one stat that's special to them that they get like a little boost on, right? And so basically, whatever your attack percent is, on top of your base attack is going to give you this new number here, which doesn't mean anything. And then after you have this, you're going to add in your flat attacks. You're going to add your feather attack and your attack subs from your artifacts, and then you get your new total attack. So what that means is your attack percent is not scaling off of these flat numbers. They're added on top. They're not scaled with that. At least that's how this game does it, or so I've heard, right? In other games, it might be different. You might get flat base attack from these kind of things in another game, and then it would scale. But in this game, because they're not giving base attack, the attack percent isn't scaling it. It's just added on top. So you can see here that because our base attack is like 600, feather's pretty important here. We got a 5-star feather plus 20. It's another 300. That's a pretty good bonus going to our attack here. And then, if we have like 60% from just like stuff, or if we like actually scale attack percent on gear, we can get this number a bit higher, right? And in a sense, that means attack percent isn't super bad, because the attack percent, like everything else, is going to be scaling your damage, right? And it's a separate multiplier, which is good. But the attack percent is only scaling off of this number, right? And it's not scaling after you add this stuff. So because you want to get that 300 from your feather, that's 300 damage that you want to be scaling. And so that's just kind of neglected by the attack percent. Anyways, we kind of lingered on this part for a little bit longer than I'd intended. But basically, let's say we have about 1,400 now total attack. This is like the number you would see on your screen. Like you got 1,900 attack on your Fischl or something, right? That's where that number is going to be. And so after this, if we want to scale our damage, the way that we do so is by applying a whole bunch of different things. So in the case of someone like Fischl, and this isn't a Fischl guide. I'm just using her as an example. I'll do a Fischl guide later. We can talk about it, right? But to scale the damage, we want to apply as many multipliers as possible. So that means lightning damage percent is going to be a separate multiplier. And then critical damage percent is going to be a separate multiplier. This is really good because it can get really high. You can get like 200% critical damage, but it's kind of drawn back and hindered by your critical rate. That doesn't mean that it's bad. In fact, critical is probably one of the best ways to scale your damage at the top end, because when you have a lot of it, it gets better because it scales with both of these things. These are almost like two separate multipliers in and of themselves. Not quite, but it's almost like that. So basically what's going to happen is, let's say that we have 50% crit rate and we have 100% crit damage. That means half the time we're going to get twice as much damage. So we can say that we're going to do an average of like 50% more damage. So let's say we have like 50% lightning damage, 50% crit damage. How else can we scale our damage, right? Well, we can do elemental reactions, right? So an elemental reaction, if the enemy is affected by Pyro, you toss your Gooba, you affected by Pyro, you summon your bird, it creates an overload. The overload is going to do a hit of like 2 times the damage. Big damage boost. For our purposes of just showing calculations, we're just going to assume that you get 50% damage bonus from that too. It's another separate multiplier. We'll just call it 50%. It's like 200%, so it's really good. But we're just going to say it's 50%, okay? With me? All right, so then the next thing you can do is you can scale Elemental Mastery. And if you check your details page of your screen, I can actually show you that. I can't show you that because I'm not logged into the game right now. But you know the one. The one on your character screen in the attributes with the little small button that says details underneath your attributes, where it says what your attack is and whatnot. You click that, and it's going to have all your stats, right? And you can see in the Elemental Mastery section, it'll tell you what that does for what elemental reaction. So it might say that if you have like 100 Elemental Mastery, you're getting like 50% increased damage when you do like an overload, electroshock, blah, 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 right? So what that basically means is because these are all separate multipliers, right? If you were to do like 10,000 damage and then you multiplied that by, you got 50% more damage from these 4 separate things, you'd have like 50k damage, right? Now, if all you had been doing is scaling all of those on one, so instead of having 4 separate 50% multipliers, let's say you just had 200% increased, let's just say lightning damage percent. Let's say you have 200% increased lightning damage percent, right? Instead of doing 50k, you're going to do like 30k, right? Because times 1, right, is the same number. So this is your normal damage. So this is 100% increased is times 2, and then times 3 is 200% increased, right? So this would be 30k, and this would be 50k. So you're getting like 20k more damage just by having those modifiers be all separate things instead of all the same thing. So what are some other ways that we can increase our damage? Well, a big one that's kind of overlooked because it's kind of hard to get is elemental resistance reduction. Viridescent set is a good way to get this. What it does, it'll lower the elemental resistance of the target after you swirl with a specific element. It'll lower that resistance for the target. And so what that means is that we'll then have another multiplier of however much, right? And then we can make this 3.5, and you can see instead of 35k, we're now doing like 75k. It's like more than twice as much, right? So the damage scales the more things that you have. That's the moral of the story, so to speak. All right, and this kind of goes for everything, right? The more of these different layers that you have, the better the thing is going to be. So with your defense, right, you might have your base defense, and then you have your percent defense, and then let's say you have elemental resistance, and then you have let's say physical damage taken reduction, like all these separate things, or total damage reduction. These aren't stats that are currently in the game, as far as I'm aware, but basically all these things will stack together to mitigate your damage taken as much as possible, right? And so basically you're just going to be looking for all these different things to scale your damage. I know I'm being a little bit repetitive here, so let's kind of move on to the next things that you can use to scale your damage. Now, this is a big one. So I was just watching this video, right, that was put out by Tectone, right? Tectone's been putting out some nice videos. So let's just talk about this. So he claims that this free-to-play weapon is very good. That's basically what it is. And it's based on this big Reddit post that he leaves in his description, which explains why weapon is very good. All right. So basically, just to kind of help you wrap your heads around why it's so good, this is kind of like the opposite of a separate damage multiplier. This is like a separate base attack. So having watched this video, right, what basically he explains is that what this weapon has is this ability that gives your character an additional 20% attack damage. And that's kind of weird because it doesn't really explain how that interacts with your other things, right? You would assume, oh, that just means it's a separate multiplier. My damage should be bigger. But what he demonstrates in the video is that when you hit with your weapon, every hit is doing an additional separate instance of damage. And And that separate instance of damage is going to be scaled by all the same things, right? So if you were to have this on, say, any regular character, it'd just be another way of like getting a multiplier to scale your damage, and that's fantastic, right? So why is it so broken on this character? Now, the reason is, and I don't know if I can find it here, right? But like, he goes in and he looks at his talent page, right? Because he talks about the attack speed of the character, right? And the attack speed of the character is important. But that's not really what the big thing here is. Okay, here it is. So we can see here that he only has a level 2 talent, and so obviously these numbers are going to go up a lot as he gets his talent leveled up. And in a sense, these are all scaling the same thing because you can almost think of this 20% as like a 20% that's added to this number here, right? So because these numbers are really low, Xiangling inherently has this trade-off where she has much lower damage percentages. Instead of like 90%, it's like 40%, 28%, 15%. So when she gets to this like 15% hit, right, like that 20% added on top of that is going to be making that like a 35% hit. It's actually more than twice as much damage on those hits, right? And the reason is that she actually, it's even better than that, because what this normally would be is like 60% damage, 50% damage, right? But this is 4 separate hits. This is 2 separate hits. So basically this, you're getting 20% and 20%. So you're getting 40%. Then here you're getting 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%. So you're dealing 15 plus 20% 4 times. And that kind of acts as a multiplier because it is attack speed. And, you know, that's just regular scaling of characters. But it's pushed to an extreme just because she has this inherent trade-off of damage and attack speed, right? And normally what you'd just find is that if there was a way of scaling your attack speed, that would also be a huge way to scale your damage. There just isn't in this game yet a lot of good ways to scale your attack speed, if any, right? But basically having all these separate things like attack speed and crit and elemental mastery and reactions and resistance reduction, and then base attack increase, attack percent, and all these things. By having all these separate things, you're going to get a bigger total amount of damage. And so that's why he explains that Crescent Pike is a very good weapon on this character. And obviously, basically, as you upgrade this and these numbers go up, you're going to see that the increase of the weapon's damage comparative to her damage is actually not going to be as big. But it's still a large amount of damage just because of her raw attack speed. Now, there's another video that I saw where someone was showcasing a DPS Barbara. I don't quite have that one on me here, but they were hitting for like 10k a hit non-critical. They weren't critical scaling. But they were literally doing the same thing where they were just stacking as many damage things as possible. They were waiting to get their rotation on their Xiangling Q so that they could trigger Vaporize for the elemental reaction. They were scaling attack percent, elemental mastery, a large amount of elemental mastery, as well as the hydro damage percent on their artifact. Now, there was one other thing I wanted to talk about that I can think of as a way to increase your damage, and that's kind of like Mona. Mona's kind of in a class of her own because I don't really know any other characters that do this right now, but Mona has this thing, right, where Mona applies a debuff to the enemy that increases the damage they take, but it's separate from resistance. So that's like a whole nother category of damage boost that you can apply to your stuff. And then I'm not sure about the Gladiator's Finale set. Let's just pull it up here because I want to talk about it. Okay, so I haven't tested this. But as far as I'm aware, you'll see that this increases the normal attack damage by 35%. Now, this doesn't say that it does an additional attack damage percent like the Crescent Pike does. So we can take that to mean that this is a different multiplier as well, which is probably why this is one of the boss sets and is very good. Because it's just going to be a separate multiplier entirely on the damage from her normal attacks. It's not going to add a separate attack, but it doesn't really matter whether or not it's adding a separate attack. right? So with the Zhangling and the Crescent Pike, right, it being separate and scaling with all the same things doesn't make it inherently stronger than her own attack. It's just the way her attack scales, that she has high attack speed, that makes it seem very powerful. But in the end, it's just a separate damage multiplier, just like this is. So if you had this and the Crescent Pike, right, like those would scale together with her normal attack, and those would be two separate multipliers, and that will make all of the damage higher. So basically, this is just the kind of stuff that you want to watch out for when you're doing your characters and trying to get the max damage possible. And of course, because we can't really do a lot with attack speed right now, one of the other alternatives that you can take a look at is things like cooldown reduction, which I know we're getting an artifact set for later, or so I've heard from data mines. Like, it's not 100% confirmed, but we've seen some artwork and some stuff, so, you know, it seems pretty legit, right? Anyways, but you also have that on your elemental resonance, right? And the elemental resonance for 2 wind, 2 animo characters is cooldown reduction, and having a higher cooldown reduction means you can cast your ability faster, which means that it's kind of like the attack speed of abilities, so to speak, because you're going to have more damage uptime, which just means you're going to be dealing more overall DPS. And energy recharge kind of fills that same role for your Q, where it's going to mean that your Q's up more. So as long as you can cast it every time that it's available to you, that's also going to be a DPS increase. So an example where you would want energy recharge is a character like Noelle, where she doesn't normally have her Q available to her because she lacks the particles to do so by the time it's off cooldown. But if you have a character like Fischl, where, let's not say Fischl, let's say Venti. You have a character like Venti where most of the time when you cast your Q, you have the particles back, but you're just waiting on your cooldown. That's where cooldown reduction is probably more important than energy recharge %. Now, once we get other methods of stacking all these things higher, you will be able to stack both of them, kind of min-max them to the point where they balance out, and you're just going to have your Q up as fast as possible, as consistently as possible, and you can do the most damage that way. Anyways, I hope this has been helpful. If there's anything I missed, feel free to leave a comment below. If you have any suggestions, leave a comment below. Please leave a like and subscribe. And if you have any video recommendations, things that you want to see outside of things I've already planned to do, please, again, leave a comment below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good day.